This 11-year-old was arrested for unaliving his pregnant stepmom, but is Jordan Brown actually guilty? When Jordan Brown was 11 years old, everyone that knew him said that he could not be happier. Jordan was raised by his single father, Christopher, who he was very close to. And his father, Christopher, had just started a relationship with another single parent named Kenzie. And as the relationship got more serious, Kenzie and her two daughters, 7-year-old Janessa and 4-year-old Adeline, moved in with Jordan and Christopher. Reportedly, the two families blended together seamlessly, and it wasn't long until Jordan was calling Kenzie mom, and Kenzie and Chris were expecting a baby of their own. In February of 2009, Kenzie was 8.5 months pregnant with baby Christopher, and Jordan was apparently really excited to be a big brother because he always wanted a baby brother. On the morning of February 20th, 2009, Chris got up for work, leaving Kenzie, who was 8.5 months pregnant, in bed, and then shortly later, Jordan and Janessa got on the school bus. And then 45 minutes after Jordan and Janessa left for school, tree trimmers that were there to work on the Browns' home heard Kenzie's 4-year-old daughter, Adeline, screaming and crying, saying that her mother was dead. 26-year-old Kenzie had been shot in the back of the head while she was still in bed, and unfortunately, her and her unborn son, Christopher, had passed away. Chris and all 3 children were taken in and asked questions about what had happened that morning. Chris was ruled out as a suspect because Kenzie's daughters confirmed that they had spoken to their mother after Chris had already left for work. The only unusual thing that Jordan remembered about that morning was a black truck parked out front of his home that he did not recognize. Chris did end up taking the 3 kids back home that night and then was woken up around 3 a.m. because the police were there to arrest his 11-year-old son for the crime. The investigators' theory was that Jordan was actually really jealous about the addition of this new baby that was coming, so that morning he spontaneously made the decision to unalive Kenzie before leaving for school. Kenzie had been shot with a 20-gauge shotgun. Jordan and Chris liked to hunt. Jordan had access to many guns, including a 20-gauge shotgun, like a children's size, that he had gotten for Christmas that year. And an officer at the scene that day said that that particular weapon had smelled like it had recently been fired. But of course, this was never able to actually be proven. They also said that it would have to be extremely unlikely for an intruder to just walk up to the Browns' home in broad daylight with a weapon of that size. While being questioned, Jordan had also changed his story about that black truck he saw. At first, he said the black truck was empty, and then later changed his story and said there was actually a man in it wearing a baseball cap who was kind of trying to duck down to not be seen. Kenzie's daughter, Janessa, who had gone on the school bus with Jordan that day, also said that when Jordan went upstairs to his room for a moment, she heard a loud boom before the two of them got on the school bus. But Kenzie's 4-year-old daughter, Adeline, said that she heard a boom sound after Janessa and Jordan had already gone on the school bus. We have to remember that they were only 7 and 9, so you really have to take their story with kind of a grain of salt. Kenzie's entire family does believe that Jordan was guilty, though. They say that he was not the happy kid that everyone thought he was and was actually extremely troubled. To this day, Chris does not buy the story of his son's involvement and actually has a theory of his own. Chris actually believes that Kenzie's ex, Adam Harvey, was responsible for her unaliving. Chris says that Kenzie was terrified of her ex, that he had actually threatened to unalive her in the weeks before her death, and she had a restraining order against him, but investigators have completely ruled this theory out. Alright, and this is me from the future. I was just editing the video and I realized I forgot to mention that Kenzie's ex, Adam, drove a black truck, the same one that Jordan saw that morning, at the time that Kenzie passed away, and Jordan had never met Adam, so he would not know what car Adam drove. And in 2012, at only 14 years old, Jordan was found guilty of double homicide. At one point after his conviction, there was talk of a possible retrial. But in 2018, Jordan's conviction was actually overturned by the Supreme Court due to a lack of evidence. And because of this, Jordan will never be able to be retried. To this day, a lot of people think that the Supreme Court got it wrong and that Jordan Brown was actually guilty and should have never been left out. But I've said it once, and I'm sure I'll say it again. I believe that if you're going to try someone, you have to prove them guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And I don't think they did in this case. And you have to prove them beyond a reasonable doubt, especially for a crime this serious and especially for someone so young. And I don't think they did. They didn't even test the house for fingerprints. But honestly, this was a town of less than 1,000 people, and I don't think that the police department was equipped for a crime this serious. But I'm super interested to get everyone else's opinion on this case because I know this is one of those cases where public opinion is very split. And also, I know I left some details out in this case. I only did that because I knew this video was going to be pretty long, so I did it for time. But if you want to keep discussing, I'm always in my comments every second I get replying to comments. I've been kind of thinking about maybe doing my first live here on TikTok, maybe sometime this week. Let me know if you'd be interested in that and what time works for the majority of people. I don't get home from work until around 6 p.m. Eastern time, but if you'd be interested in that, we could talk about cases together, or we could do more of like a Q&A. Let me know what you think in the comments, because if people aren't interested in it, I won't do it. But I thought it'd be fun, and people have been asking me to do like a podcast or something, so I feel like that could be kind of something similar. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you guys for the next video.
In 2008, Kinsey Houck was a 26-year-old single mom raising two daughters, 7-year-old Janessa and 4-year-old Adeline, when she reconnected with a guy she knew when she was a teenager named Chris Brown. Chris was also a single dad raising his 11-year-old son, Jordan. Chris and Kinsey started dating and eventually got engaged, and after the engagement, they, along with the 3 kids, moved into a farmhouse on 40 acres in Wampum, Pennsylvania. In mid-2008, they found out that Kinsey was pregnant and everyone was amped. They found out it was a boy, and that was very exciting, especially for Jordan because he wanted a little brother. They even picked out a name, Baby Christopher. Fast forward to the morning of February 20th, 2009. It was a Friday, and Kinsey was 8.5 months pregnant. Chris got up to get ready for work. He left the house around 6:45 a.m., and Kinsey started getting the older kids ready for school. Jordan and Janessa were eating breakfast and watching TV when Kinsey came in just after 8 a.m. and hurried them off so they didn't miss the school bus. They ran and got on the bus at 8:15 a.m. 4-year-old Adeline was still asleep, so Kinsey went to lie down because, again, 8.5 months pregnant. Woof. At 9 a.m., tree trimmers came to the house to do some work. About 10 minutes after they got there, one of them looked over and saw 4-year-old Adeline crying in the doorway. She was just frantic. So he ran over to her, and she was yelling, "Mommy's dead." He called 911, and the police got there and found Kinsey lying on her side in bed in a pool of blood. She had been shot in the back of the head. They tried CPR, but sadly, it was too late. They call Chris at work and tell him to come home immediately. When he does, a cop meets him in the front yard and breaks the news that sadly his fiance and unborn baby, Christopher, were both murdered. He collapses right there in the yard. He's devastated. They start collecting evidence at the crime scene. There was no clear murder weapon, like no gun lying next to her, but this is farm country, and Chris and Jordan are both huge hunters, so there are a bunch of guns in the house. Police collect said guns, one of which was a 20-gauge shotgun, and when one of the troopers smells the barrel, it smells like it had been fired recently. They also find 3 20-gauge shell casings outside. Chris was the first one they look at per usual, but he had a solid alibi. His work confirmed he got to work at 7 a.m. They also tested him for gunpowder residue on his hands, and he didn't have any, so he was cleared. Police go to the school to talk to 11-year-old Jordan and 7-year-old Janessa. They don't tell them anything about what happened, but they just want to hear about their morning. Janessa said everything was pretty typical, nothing out of the ordinary. Jordan said the same thing. He said Janessa woke him up, he got dressed, he and Janessa were watching TV, eating breakfast. Kinsey came in and told them to hurry because the bus was coming and she didn't want them to miss it. They ran out at 8:15 and got on. They also talked to the school bus driver, who confirmed that they got on at 8:15 a.m. and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. They weren't screaming. They seemed how they always did. The only unusual thing that Jordan mentioned was that while he was getting on the school bus, he noticed a black truck that he didn't recognize parked on their property. This is especially interesting because what Jordan didn't know is that Kinsey's abusive ex-boyfriend, who she had a protective order against, drove a black truck. His name was Adam Harvey. He and Kinsey dated for 6 years. They lived in North Carolina together until 2008 when she broke up with him and moved up to Pennsylvania. In October 2008, 4 months before the murder, he followed her up there and moved there too. When he got there, he found out that she moved on and was pregnant with Chris's baby, and he started harassing her and her parents. He was leaving very threatening voicemails, threatening to kill her and her family, so the entire family actually had protective orders against him. 7 days before the murder, Adam found out that 4-year-old Adeline was not his biological daughter. Apparently, he was under the impression during her first 4 years that he was the dad, and when Kinsey broke up with him, she asked for child support, and he said, while I'm paying this, let's do a paternity test. Well, the results came back 7 days before the murder that he was not the dad. Also, at the time of the murder, he was living only 10 miles from Kinsey, so slam dunk of a suspect. They bring him in. He denies it. He said he was at his parents' house all morning sleeping. His dad vouches for him that he was there all morning, never left. They also seized his truck and it still had snow on it, like it hadn't moved all morning. He also didn't have gunpowder residue on his hands. So they let him go for now and carry on with the investigation. The following morning, on February 21st at 3:30 a.m., Chris and the kids had finally fallen asleep when there's pounding on the front door. Chris jumps up to answer it, and it's the police. They were there to make an arrest. They bust in and arrest 11-year-old Jordan Brown. So Jordan is arrested. They take him to county jail, not juvie. They separate him from his dad. He gets a mugshot. Here's why they arrested Jordan. An autopsy showed that Kinsey was killed by a shotgun, and the shotgun they smelled at the scene that smelled like it had been fired was Jordan's. He had just gotten it for Christmas. His clothes showed some evidence of gunpowder residue. It was just a few particles. He wasn't covered in it. When they interviewed Janessa and Jordan the second time, both of their stories changed a little bit. Jordan still mentioned the black truck, but the description of the lights changed a little bit. He also all of a sudden said he saw a person in there wearing a white hat and kind of crouching down like he was hiding. Again, Janessa was also questioned several times, and her story was consistent the first two times, saying everything was normal and fine. But when questioned a third and fourth time, she said she saw Jordan moving his guns that morning, and when she went downstairs to wait on him so they could run to the school bus, she heard a loud boom that sounded like a gunshot. The motive, they said, was he was jealous of the new baby coming and was pissed he had to switch rooms because he was in the process of switching rooms with Chris and Kinsey because he had the room next to the nursery. They transferred him to a juvenile detention center in Erie, which was a 4-hour drive round trip. Chris drove there every single day. He ended up losing his job over it. Jordan maintained his innocence the entire time, and Chris 100% believed him. Kinsey's family, however, doesn't. Even though during questioning they said everyone was happy, Jordan called Kinsey mom, everyone was a big happy family. Now they're saying Jordan is a murderer, and they were pushing him to be tried as an adult and get the maximum sentence, which is life without parole. And originally, this is exactly what was going to happen. He was arrested and charged as an adult. But after a huge fight from his defense team and after almost 3 years of being held in the juvenile center, it was finally moved to the juvenile court, and his trial started in April 2012. After the 3-day trial, Jordan, who was 14 years old at this point, was found guilty of first-degree murder and criminal homicide of an unborn child. He was sentenced to stay in this secure juvenile detention center until he was 21 years old. Technically, in juvenile court, it's delinquent, not guilty, but it's the same thing. His defense team immediately filed an appeal after the trial, but it took 3.5 years for the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to hear it. Ultimately, the Supreme Court ended up not only overturning the conviction, but exonerating Jordan. And in 2016, he was released at 18 years old. And the reasons they said Jordan should have never been tried for this are listed in the appeal and in a lawsuit that Jordan would later file in 2023 against Pennsylvania State Police Commissioner and 4 state troopers who investigated the case. The points listed are shocking, and I tried to do this in one part. I can't. It's too much to go into, so I'm going to do a part 2. Okay, part 2 of the Jordan Brown case. I'm about to go through the reasons listed in his lawsuit against Pennsylvania Police Commissioner and 4 state troopers on why he should have never been arrested and charged for murder at 11 years old. For starters, when the 2 troopers came to the house and found Kinsey, they started CPR, and in the process, they moved her body. Contamination number 1. This is gross, sorry. But when each of them tried mouth-to-mouth, the gases exuding from Kinsey's deceased body caused both of them to vomit. So they both ran through the house trying to find a way out so they didn't vomit in the crime scene. One of them made it, one of them didn't. So one of them did vomit in the crime scene. And in the chaos, they were smearing blood everywhere and even left their own bloody fingerprints all over the place because it was just chaotic. Contamination 2 through a million. The trooper in charge of interviewing the kids, her name was Janice Wilson. She had no training in child interviews and didn't know that there were national guidelines in interviewing kids. Therefore, she violated all said guidelines. For instance, she only recorded one of the interviews. I'll get to which one in a second. She didn't document any of the questions she asked. She made notes about the interviews and their answers days or even weeks after the fact, and she destroyed all of her notes after she turned in the official report about the interviews, all of which are hard no. When they asked why they had her conduct the interviews when she was not trained, the reason was because women are better with kids than men. That's true, but not in this case. And I know it's not always true, chill. Now for the actual interviews. They interviewed 7-year-old Janessa 4 times in the 12 hours following the murder, and several of the interviews were late at night. There was a 45-minute gap between interviews 3 and 4 that was, quote, off the record. No. The 4th interview was the only one that was recorded, and that took place at 12:15 a.m., well after her normal bedtime, i.e., she's very tired, and that lasted an hour. That's when she mentioned the big boom. It was later learned that sometime after the second interview and before the recorded fourth interview, they told her that her grandparents, Kenzie's parents, believed that Jordan did this. So she just kind of went with it. That's when she was like, oh yeah, I saw him with a gun and then heard a big boom. This is why there's training when interviewing kids. They are much more agreeable with whatever an adult's telling them, especially that late at night when they're exhausted. This just pisses me off more than anything. When they questioned Adam Harvey, they seized his truck and took grass samples and mud samples from the tires, but never tested them against the grass and mud on Kenzie's property. When they asked him why his truck was so muddy, he said he got stuck in some mud at his parents' house, but they never went to his parents' house to see if there's like trenches in the yard, see if it's true. And again, when they questioned Jordan and he told him about the black truck, he had no idea who Adam was and definitely not what kind of car he drove. And while Jordan was in custody, apparently they got a handwritten tip that Adam confided in a friend at a party crying through tears that he killed his ex-girlfriend, and they didn't do anything with this tip. Lastly, Jordan's 20-gauge shotgun was never proven to be the murder weapon. They merely smelled it and determined it had been fired recently, which it was because a few days prior, Chris and Jordan took part in a turkey shoot. The gunpowder residue found on his clothes were just particles of it and was from the jacket that he wore during said turkey shoot. Speaking of gunpowder residue, they never tested his hands for it. Also, there was no blood or tissue found on Jordan's clothing that he wore to school that day. They're saying he shot someone at close range and didn't get any blood on him. However, I will say the prosecutor had an expert during the trial that said, based on the angle and the type of gun, it is possible. There might be very little blowback, but there was also no tissue or blood on the actual gun. So he would have had to, within the 2 minutes that Janessa was waiting for him to go to the school bus, committed this horrific murder, perfectly clean the gun, and then run downstairs, all without anyone knowing. They also argued that the shotgun shells found outside meant nothing. There were shotgun shells all over the place. Jordan and Chris shot on that property all the time. Quick summary, they completely failed to do a real investigation, and because of it, Jordan has PTSD and was robbed of his childhood. They should have investigated Adam Harvey way more, and he was cleared way too quickly. So in 2023, Jordan sued, citing all of those reasons, saying he still suffers from fear, humiliation, and mental anguish. The last article I read about it said that there was a trial date set for February 5th, 2024, but I can't find anything about it, nothing about a settlement, the outcome, so I don't know if it was delayed or I don't know what the status is. But Jordan seems to be doing really well considering this traumatic experience. He went on to study computer science at a college in Ohio. His dad still sticks by him 100%. Kenzie's family and the investigators who put them through it still think he did it. Reminder, it's very hard to put every single detail in a TikTok, so to hear.
So this is Jordan and his dad in the ID 2020 interview, which is really good. And if you're really interested in this, I suggest you go watch it. But yeah, let's start from where we left off. So instead of investigating into Kenzie's ex-boyfriend more, they just decide to pin it on 11-year-old Jordan. So he goes to jail and he's in jail for 9 years and he gets out when he's 20 years old. And every single day, Jordan's dad, Christopher, drives almost 300 miles to go see his son in prison. And there's a handful of times where Christopher is like, Jordan, like, did you do this? Like, I need to know if you did this. Like, I'm your dad at the end of the day. Like, I'm gonna be there for you, but like, I need to know if you did this. And every single time Jordan was like, Dad, like, I didn't do it. Like, I don't even know why I'm in here. And of course Christopher is gonna know if Jordan did it, because at the end of the day, that's his dad. And like, parents have like those brain powers if they just know where their kid is like lying or not. He's like, I know when my son is lying to me, and he's not lying. He's told the same story for almost 10 years. It's never changed. Jordan can't even plan his own birthday party, let alone a murder. This part makes me so sad. While Jordan's in jail, he says that he reads the whole time. And since he was so young, like the words in these books, a lot of the times he didn't know what they meant. So he always had a dictionary with him and he would open up the page of the dictionary to see what the word meant. And then he'd like continue on with his book. And he also taught himself how to play guitar. He's so sweet. Like, it's just so sad. And my heart breaks for him. And that's pretty much what Jordan's life was for 9 years. But let's talk about Kenzie's family, because this shit got me pressed. So the reason why Jordan was released from jail was because the case ended up going to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And they were like, yeah, there isn't enough evidence that you did this. So, you can peace out now. Sorry for the last 9 years of your life. And outside of that building, her family was there. I was gonna play the clip for you, but I can't find it on Google, so I'm just gonna tell you what happened. Her family's outside the courtroom, bad-mouthing Jordan, saying, oh, he did it, and he better not get away with it, he better spend the rest of his life in prison until he dies. And part of me is like, I get it, like, I know you're really angry and hurt and upset and confused about what happened to daughter, grandchild, niece, aunt, etc. And part of me really believes that the detectives were like pushing that it's Jordan onto her family. So like I get why you're upset and angry, but at the same time, like, do you really think this 11-year-old boy killed his stepmom? Because from what I've heard in the interviews, like he loved Kenzie. And if I didn't say it already, which I don't think I did, the detectives say that the motive of why Jordan killed Kenzie is because he didn't like her, which wasn't true. And then Jordan ended up getting his conviction overturned on July 2018, I believe. But he is just like the sweetest person in these interviews. He's like, I don't have any ill will towards anybody in this case. I'm not angry at anybody, but shame on you for what you did to me. But
I became the youngest prisoner in America when I was 11 years old and was convicted of a double heinous crime. But was I guilty? Let me tell you my story. My name is Jordan Brown, and this is my true story. I lost my mother early, and my father, Chris Brown, was engaged to Kenzie Houck, who had 2 children and was pregnant. I was 11 years old when my father gave me a 20-gauge shotgun for Christmas so I could go hunting with him. Unfortunately, this gift brought me pain instead of joy. On that tragic day in 2009, I went to school in the morning with 7-year-old Janessa, Kenzie's older daughter. When I returned from school, I learned that Kenzie and her unborn child had been shot by someone. This tragedy happened around the same time I left the house, and about 45 minutes later, Kenzie's younger daughter found her mother in such a horrific state and ran out of the house to inform the tree trimmers working nearby, who then called 911. The next day, I was arrested and charged with the crime. The police found no direct evidence, only that my shotgun had been used recently. They theorized that I acted out of jealousy, but I maintained my innocence throughout the 7.5 years and never changed my statement. During all these years, I was in custody and read many books that my father brought me. At the age of 18, I was released due to a lack of evidence. What do you think about my story?